Well, hello everyone, and welcome to another edition of Let's Paint a Mini. And this time we're going to be moving on to more of the Reaper Doom miniatures, and I figured we would knock out the Pain Elemental here. Now he's going to be a little bit tricky actually, and I think that's mostly attributed to that weird thing in his mouth. Now, if you attained this miniature in the same way that I attained him, which is through the Bethesda store, basically, the big collection that you can buy from Bethesda.net, they come pre-assembled. Now, if you have the original print of the miniatures, or the original line of the miniatures, which is kind of unlikely because they're very rare nowadays, then you actually had to assemble him. You had to sort of put the top onto the actual, bottom there. And it would be easier to paint the mouth with that being the case, but you don't have that option. So you're just going to have to paint him already assembled like this. So I figured that we would start with the mouth, since that's probably going to be one of the trickier parts, and the first thing that we're going to start with actually is a little bit of sun yellow here. Doesn't really matter what kind of brush that you use, because you're going to do something very, very simple. So you can just take like a pretty large no-name brush right here, and you can just basically get in there in the mouth, and you're basically just going to paint the skull that's in there. Again, you don't have to be worried about the details or anything, because it's really, really hard to get your brush in there and to be very, very fine and precise with how this miniature has been assembled. But that's okay. Just knock it out pretty simply, and I think that you'll do okay. All right, just a little something like that. It's hard to, like I said, it's hard to get in there and show off the light, but yeah, you just want to basically get the skull covered in yellow like that. That is pretty much it. So you're going to rinse your brush off, and before you move on to the next step, just make sure that he is fully dried. So I'm actually going to give him just a couple of minutes to make sure that he's completely dried before I move on to the next part. Alright, and I think that that is pretty well dry, I would say, so I'm going to move on to the next step. We're going to get some red going inside of that mouth, as well as on the eye. And we're going to use some Phoenix Red for that. This is a nice bright red color, but it's got just a little bit of an orange sort of tint to it, just a little bit, nothing too major, but it's, yeah, just kind of a reddish, orangish kind of thing. Alright, and what we're going to do with that first is we're going to go ahead and dry brush the interior of the mouth using that Phoenix Red color across the skull. And that will make it so that, the entirety of the mouth is still nice and red, but the skull just has a little bit of a sort of, yellow at its core. And that's what we're going to be looking for. So we're just going to do our regular dry brushing technique. Just get a little bit of paint onto your brush, but wipe off most of it. You don't want to go too crazy. Just like that, and I'm just going to use kind of a random sort of no-name flat brush right here because I don't want to use like a full-sized large dry brush, because that will probably brush up against the teeth and the bristles, and I'm not necessarily worried about the paint job for the miniature, but I would be worried about the lifespan of the brush. So just use sort of a cheap sort of no-name brush. If you've got one of these kind of flat ones like that, go ahead and use that. But just use whatever's comfortable for you. Man, it's kind of awkward going about this just because the brush itself, like the base, is just clacking against the teeth like that. And it's just making it hard to get at it from all angles. Yeah, I really wish these miniatures kind of were not already assembled when you ordered them, because it would just make painting them a heck of a lot easier. But, that's just me. Alright. And then, yeah, like I said, it's kind of hard to see in there, but you can just kind of see that it's mostly yellow with a little bit of a sort of highlighting of red. And that's what we're looking for. So I'm going to rinse that brush off. I think that I'm done with it. And then I'll just move on back to the old brush that I was using, that previous one. And now we're going to go ahead and just go over the entirety of the inside of the mouth from there. Now, be kind of careful. Obviously, you don't want to go over the skull, but you kind of want to blend the orange color into the skull a little bit. So just sort of, tap along the side of the mouth, leading into, that sort of blends into the skull. Just try to be a little bit careful. You can do sort of a dry brushing technique by doing this, by just sort of, using what's left on your brush and just sort of softly going, working your way around the skull. Yeah, I'm sorry if I can't really show what I'm doing very well here, just because I can't really get my light in there and record and show what I'm doing all at the same time. So sorry about that, but you know, I'll just do what I can. Unfortunately, that's pretty much it. I would say too, if you can just sort of dot each eye of the skull in there, like I think I can get it at an angle just like that, and you can kind of see that there's sort of like eyeballs almost, but I think they're more just sort of designed to be sort of prominent for you to put some lighting on there. Just like that. That just sort of adds a little bit of some sort of eyes on the side. Some sort of eyes on there. Just like that. That will be just fine. Alright, and now we've got pretty much the entirety of the mouth all red like that. There's a little bit of yellow with the skull in there. Alright, now we're going to just sort of work our way out of the mouth. And feel free to get just a little bit, you know, around. Just sort of think of them as like the gums or the lips. Feel free to just go ahead and go, you know, up into the actual skin tone a little bit. Because the original sprite kind of shows that it's not just the interior of the mouth that's red, but it's the sort of, you know, the entirety of the edge of the mouth that like the teeth are surrounding are also red. So feel free to just get a little bit of red, you know, as sort of like, you know, gums or lips or however you want to see it. There we go, and then that just gets the rest of the mouth there like that. Okay, so that looks okay, so I'm going to go ahead and rinse my brush off. And next up, why don't we just move on to the actual skin tone for the paint elemental, and to do that I'm going to use some leather brown right here. This is my good old-fashioned go-to handy-dandy leather brown color, and I think that will make a pretty good skin tone for the paint elemental. Nice and brown, you know, they're a little bit... If it weren't for the eye and the mouth, then the paint elemental would be a very, very sort of flat brownish color. But, you know, the like I said, that eye... Oh, shoot! I'm rushing myself. I'm rushing myself too much because I totally forgot about the eye. Yikes. So like I said, you're just going to use the same, you know, Phoenix Red... I'm knocking everything around. We're going to use the same Phoenix Red color, and we're just going to go over the eye really quickly. Nothing major. Just, you know, like I said, just go over the whole eye and don't worry about getting a little bit of paint onto the skin tone surrounding it, because we are about to go over all of the skin tone with that leather brown color. So don't worry about it. There we go, simple as that. Alright, rinse that off, and then just go back to leather brown. And you can use whatever, really whatever brush you want. You can use any sort of, any size, any, you know, whatever you're just the most comfortable with, I would say. Don't worry about getting the exact, you know, defining lines in between the skin tones and the horns, because we are going to go over the horns with another color later on. So if you want to, you know, kind of like what I did right here, you see how I've got a little bit of color onto the horn there, and that's just because I went over it really quickly. You can do that. You don't have to worry too much about it, because you're only going to worry about getting the horn figured out whenever you move on to the horn. But it's whatever you prefer. If you also just want to get some practice in, you know, you just want to work on, you know, getting your precision down, and you want to make sure that, you know, you can get details and precision and all that down. It's a good point to practice on, since it doesn't particularly matter whether you know, feel like you would mess it up or not. Alright, and that's pretty much it for all of the skin tone right there. So now we've got a nice, fleshy paint elemental right there. Gonna rinse my brush off. Next up, it doesn't particularly matter which step you move on to. You could do either the teeth or the horns. I'm going to start with the teeth, just because I kind of want to knock them out. And I'm going to use my golden blonde color right here, and we're going to basically do a similar thing to what we did with the Cacodemon from this line of miniatures, which is that we're going to use this on the teeth. And we're also going to use it on the base, and I think that when that base is good and finished, it will kind of resemble that almost, you know, Doom 2 intermission screen just a little bit, with that cool sort of, you know, tannish, fleshy, swirling kind of look to it. So we're going to go with that, and it doesn't particularly matter what brush. Yeah, I'll just continue. Well, use a slightly smaller brush. I'm just going to use a somewhat more detailed brush for the teeth, but then I'll use a larger one for the base, so just whatever you're comfortable with right now, I would say. And just take your time going over each of the individual little teeth right here. No need to rush it. There's sort of like 3 teeth on the front here that are right next to each other. You can probably just go over all of them like that, because we're going to go over the entirety of the miniature, teeth and all, using a quick shade, using a shade, and using that will probably help to separate those 3 sort of teeth on the very, very front on his top row of teeth. All right, and there we go. Now we've got a nice rows, some nice rows of teeth on our paint elemental there. That looks pretty cool. So I'm going to rinse that brush off, and then we're going to continue using that same color, but I am going to go back to using a larger brush, like so. And we're just going to use that to get the base here, just because we want to, like I said, you know, we want a little bit of consistency, and since we did this golden blonde thing with the Cacodemon, we might as well just use the same thing for the paint elemental here. And then we'll go over that with a shade later on, and I think that that will turn out just fine. Alright, and there we go. So now we've just got the base nice and done right there, so I'm going to rinse that brush off. Alright, and then next up we're going to move on to a midnight blue color. This is just a really, really dark blue color, kind of a grayish, kind of a dark gray color almost. Just a little bit of a blue sort of tint to it. Oh man, there we go. Let me get some out. Okay, and we're going to use that for a couple of things. First, we are going to move on to the actual eye. We're gonna brush up some detail on the eye before we actually move on. I'm going to take a small brush right here. Now, you don't need a brush that's, you know, this tiny. You could get a brush that just has a really, you know, fine point on it. Like so. You could just do, you know, something like that. Here, tell you what, I'll use this brush, actually, because it's just got a really sharp point on it. And that's all that you really need to do, because what we're going to do is you're basically going to paint a little pupil onto the actual eye. And luckily, there's already sort of an indentation on the model to sort of show where the pupil can go. You're just going to go around that really quickly. Just to give him an actual eye, so to speak. Alright, like so. That's pretty much all that you really need to do right there. Now, if you want to as well, you can go ahead and take some yellow, and you can, tell you what, I'll do that actually here for you. Since I think that my yellow there is still a little bit wet, what you can do is you can just take a little bit of yellow, and you can just dot it onto the very center of the eye. Like so. That's really all that you need right there. That looks pretty darn cool. Now, you don't have to do that. If you want, you can just leave the center of the eye that Phoenix red color. It's whatever you prefer. Alright, but after you do that, you are then going to move on to the actual horns and the claws, and we're going to go back to using one of these, you know, big gnarly brushes right here. And yeah, you're just going to go over the horns, like so. Be a little bit more careful, just because you want to blend, you don't really want to blend the horns into the flesh. There's going to be sort of a nice defining line where the sort of flesh overlaps the horn. And there you go. Now you've got the horns on there, and they look nice and pronounced there as well. Alright, and I'm just going to go ahead and dab on the claws here really quickly, just to kind of give them the same sort of consistency and look of the actual horns. You know, it stands to reason that they would be made of a similar material, I think. Alright, and there you go. So now that just gives the actual claws there nice definition. So now we're going to rinse that brush off. Alright, and last up, we're just going to finish up with our shade. So I'm going to use some Nuln Oil, this, Citadel brand Nuln Oil. If you don't have this brand, you can just use any sort of, basically a black tone. So I'm just going to, you could use like this Army Painter dark tone right here. You could use that if you wanted to. But we're going to use that for the actual base. And we have another instance where it really doesn't matter what kind of brush you use at all, just kind of whatever is comfortable for you. So I'll just use this same big old brush that we've been using here. Alright, and you're just gonna go ahead and get it all over the actual base right here. Starting, the thing that's sort of like elevating the actual paint elemental up. I love the sculpts of these bases with these miniatures. They're so well defined. I mean, you put this quick shade in there and it immediately brings out all of these really cool evocative shapes like faces and rib cages and sternums, and it's so cool. Really, really, really huge props to the sculptors. There we go. That's it for the base. That looks pretty darn cool. I like that a lot. Alright, now we're going to close that, and we're going to actually use a slightly different shade for the actual paint elemental itself. If you really want to, you can probably just use that same shade if you want. It's whatever you kind of prefer. Let me make sure, actually, that I just want to make sure it's completely dry, like the horns and such. I think that it looks pretty dry enough. So yeah, I think so. So we're going to use this Agrax Earth Shade. This is a really, really good shade that you could use right here. If you don't have this exact brand, a good stand-in for like Army Painter, for example, would be like Strong Tone. Strong Tone would work just fine right here. But basically, this is just a sort of brownish shade that, obviously adds shade, but it's got just a little bit of coloration to it. Nothing too major, but just a little bit. And that's kind of what we're looking for. I would basically just do everything except for the mouth. And by the mouth I mean like the interior of the mouth. So like still get the teeth. You want the teeth to be nice and defined, but you kind of want to leave the interior of the mouth that sort of bright, fiery color. Alright, and after you get the flesh tone down and you've got the horns nice and covered like so, you are done, or at least I would say that you're done. I don't think that there's pretty much anything else. If you want to add a varnish, you can add a varnish. I haven't really addressed that with any of the previous Reaper miniatures, I don't think. But that's something that you can do, is you could add a layer of varnish just to add an extra layer of protection. But otherwise, that right there, I think, is a pretty darn cool paint elemental. So thank you everybody for watching. If you liked the video, go ahead and throw it a like. If you want to see the rest of the Reaper Doom miniatures getting painted, go ahead and subscribe to the channel. I've got some other stuff that I've got to, work on and do, but I'll take that as it comes. Anyway, I won't take up any of your time, so make sure that that's closed before I shake it up. Okay, I think we're set. All right, good, excellent. So yeah, there you go. Thank you again, everybody, for watching. We'll see you next time.